Write a computer algorithm to check whether a function from one finite set to another is one-to-one. Assume the existence of an independent algorithm to compute values of the function. So to be one-to-one means that every output that we get in this function is different from every other output. So what we can do is we can take every element in our domain and find all of the corresponding outputs by plugging them into the function. Remember, we get to assume the existence of an independent algorithm to compute the values of the function, which, by the way, I'm just going to call f, lowercase f. So if you notice lowercase f in this program, that means that we're referencing the assumed independent algorithm that exists that is used to compute the values of the function. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all of the inputs of the function and we're going to plug them into f, and we're going to find the outputs of the function. And then we're going to ask if there are any repeat elements in those lists of all of the outputs. Now, f, we're going to imagine, is a function that takes elements from the set capital X and maps them to elements in the codomain capital Y. In this program, we're actually going to represent these objects here, capital X and capital Y, not as sets, but actually as lists, which are kind of like sets, but they have order to them. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new set. It's going to be specifically the range of the function, which is not the same as capital Y. Capital Y is the codomain of this function. What we're going to do is we're going to start by iterating through all the elements in our domain. So for every element in X, we're going to do a for loop. Now, I should instantiate my list Z. We're going to store all of our outputs in this list Z. So in particular, we're going to append the output f of x to z. And let me add a little bit of an indent here to show that this is within the for loop. So this for loop constructs our range. Now we have to ask ourselves if there are any repeat elements in the range. To do that, we're going to need a nested for loop. Now, I think to make this a little bit computationally easier, we can actually do this check within the original for loop. So as we add elements to our range, we should check first that that element is not already in the range. If it is, then we can end the for loop and we can decide that this is not one-to-one. So what we're going to do before we append this element to the range, we're going to check if f of x is already in this list, z. So we can check if the value of f of x is the same as the value of y for every element in z already. If they are, then that means that f of x is already in the range. And now I'm going to insert this variable one-to-one at the very beginning of this program, which is going to be by default true. We're going to assume that our function is one-to-one until we find a counterexample. And once we find the counterexample, which is only satisfied if f of x equals y, which means that if we can find a repeat element in our list z, then that means we have two different inputs that map to the same output, which means the function is not one-to-one. So if this if statement is satisfied, then we want to change the one-to-one to false. And then at the very end of this function, we can return one-to-one. So one-to-one is assumed to be true, but what we do is we go through each element in our domain, and then we check our range. Now keep in mind, the range is constructed as we go through all of our elements in X. So in the very beginning of this program, Z starts out as an empty list. What we do is we check if this output, f of x, is already in the list. So we iterate through each element in our list and check to see if f of x is already on that list. If it is, then we change one-to-one to false. If it's not, then we add that output to our range. So at the very end of this for loop here, we will have constructed a list z that represents the range of the function. And if there are any repeats in that list, then this if statement will identify that repeat at some point. And that is the computer algorithm that checks whether a function from one finite set to another is one-to-one. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.